As voters hit the polls, there are 308 candidates on the ballot across the country who've raised baseless doubts about the validity or integrity of the 2020 election results.
And there are concerns about what these candidates might do about the election results this time around. So CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane is joining us now to talk a little bit more about this. Scott, good morning. Good to see you.
Hey, Marie, Vlad, it's really good to be with you both here in New York.
I can't believe we're still talking about these election deniers, though. And then
More
so many
than 300 out of the 500
It's a big
plus.
issue tonight.
Yeah.
It's a really big issue tonight. Let me explain why. 308 is more than just a singular standalone number. That is more than 50% of all federal or statewide candidates nationwide. And these candidates exist in 48 of the 50 states. It's not just a red state phenomenon. That includes a majority of U.S. House candidates are election deniers. That includes a majority of U.S. Senate candidates who we characterize as election deniers. What do we mean when we say that? Well, CBS News has a definition. These are candidates who meet one or more of the following criteria. They've questioned the legitimacy of President Biden's election. They've said the 2020 election was stolen. They've repeated disproven claims of fraud. They signed on to that Texas lawsuit after the 2020 election to overturn other states' electoral counts. They objected on the House floor to the 2020 Electoral College count, January 6, 2021, after the insurrection, or they supported certain post-2020 audits. So those 308 are candidates who've done one of the following. For those who objected to the 2020 Electoral College count, those are members of Congress who were claiming fraud on some of the very ballots in which they were elected in 2020. And one note, what happens to the non-election deniers? Here's a good snapshot. These 10 U.S. House Republicans voted to impeach former President Trump after the Capitol riot. 4 retired, facing in some cases, dismal prospects for re-election. 4 lost primary races to Trump-backed opponents, including famously Liz Cheney, a member of that House January 6 committee, which means, Vladimir, there are only 2 remaining on the ballot tonight. David Valadao of California and Dan Newhouse of Washington, which means there'll be, at the most, 2 returning members of the U.S. House who impeached former President Trump.
So we have all these candidates who deny the outcome of the election. And as you point out, there are various positions. Some of those positions would have influence over the next election, whether they're governors who pick the Secretary of States or Secretary of States who oversee the elections, or attorney generals who, would accept lawsuits. But we've talked a lot about what could possibly happen if these people get elected, these deniers. But what if they don't get elected? Are they going to start talking about the validity of this election?
Great question, because we have to also keep in mind that of these 308, not all of them are going to win. And in some cases, if past is prologue, based on what they said after the 2020 election, even if their party retakes control of the U.S. House or takes control of the U.S. Senate or wins in certain places on their state ballots, doesn't mean they're going to go quietly. Some have questioned whether the methodical counting of votes, which is part of the American experience, is trustworthy. Some Republicans have claimed that because it takes time to count votes, that it can't be trusted. Former President Trump said that famously after the 2020 election. It's worth keeping this in mind, Vladimir. There isn't one national election today. That's not what this is. This is a combination of 10,000 or so local elections being administered by counties, municipalities, and states. It's more of a collage than a singular federal dynamic moment.
So we've seen some sitting GOP lawmakers cast out on election results in Arizona. Congressman Paul Gosar posted his tweet, I think we have it, yesterday, trying to project suspicion about not getting election results. What are the long-term impacts? Here's the tweet. What are the long-term impacts of the attacks on the system? Because as David Becker pointed out earlier on our air, there have always been delays in counting votes. It's just that things have gotten much tighter in certain states. For example, there won't be any surprise that New York will know the results of New York by 8 p.m. tonight, or at least within a couple of hours. We won't be thinking about it. I don't know now. The governor's race is pretty tight. Yeah. So let me. But in other words, my point simply is, and you know this, is that the things have gotten tighter across the country, so it takes a little longer to count. It seems that way to people. But what are the implications of consistently attacking election integrity like this?
Yeah, in some states, it takes a while based on those state rules, and not just swing states. That's true in Maryland, a particularly blue state. It'll take days, if not weeks, for them to count their votes based on the composition of their election laws. But statements like that it's not trustworthy when states take time, sows distrust in the overall system. And I can give you an anecdote to illustrate what that means on the ground. The elections administrator in Ingham County, Michigan, that's Lansing, Michigan, pretty purple county, says she has reconfigured her cell phone to put the sheriff and the sheriff's deputies on her VIP list so that they are more immediately reachable. If there's any reason, she's got to call them out to one of the dozens of polling places they have. She wants to have security in case anybody's there to menace or harass. And Vladimir, I want to underscore this. That's not just a dynamic today. That's a concern in the days ahead when they are counting the votes. We saw that in 2020, where there were people menacing election counters during the counting process. That issue doesn't end today.
So I know you and Nikki Batiste are going to be anchoring in the noon hour. What's coming up?
Well, we're going to focus probably quite a bit on the election itself.
I think
so. We have some guests and candidates, some elections administrators to talk more about this topic. But also, it's not going unnoticed that there was a Powerball drawing for some reason this morning. There's a hurricane coming to the United States. And all this is happening as millions of Americans, in some cases, wait online, in some cases don't, to cast a vote in a midterm election.
Yeah.
I'm curious, though. I'm just thinking a little bit about what we've been discussing, what you've been showing us here with regards to those who are election deniers. And look at this number, 308. It's so stark.
Something, isn't it?
Yeah, and I wonder if there are people who think long term. In other words, I think people understand when the price of gas is expensive and the price of food is expensive. But if there's a politician who is against election integrity, who's against the peaceful transfer of power. I mean, we have a republic, and that republic is dependent on this peaceful transfer of power. If you have politicians out there who are against that, I wonder if that's reflective in some of the polling, that people say, look, I know it's expensive to put gas in the car. I know it's expensive to put food on the table, but I'm more concerned about the survivability of our democracy.
There was some hope or expectation from Democrats this would be a galvanizing, mobilizing issue for the midterm elections. And the polling doesn't indicate it is. It indicates that the things right in front of voters' faces, the immediate concern about gas prices, crime, grocery prices, immigration, are driving them. But I want to scribble on one more number if I can.
Sure.
124. Members of the U.S. House voted to decertify the 2020 election results in some states after the Capitol insurrection, literally in the minutes and hours after it. It's possible tonight those 124 who are on the ballot tonight are all going to win. That makes a statement one way or the other about the issue of democracy in this election.
Wow.
Scott, very stark reminder. Thank you very much, my friend. Appreciate it. Well, throughout